They called it Sector Zero in the dispatches, a stretch of the front line in the Argonne Forest that was more mud than trench. I was Private Arthur Finch, a rifleman with the 5th Battalion. We were sent to relieve a French unit that had been manning the line for a month. When we arrived, the French soldiers looked like ghosts in their faded blue uniforms. Their eyes were hollow, staring at something 1,000 miles away. Their officer, a captain with a twitching eye, wouldn't even look at our lieutenant. He just pointed toward the dense, dark tree line beyond the barbed wire and muttered something in French that sounded like a curse. I asked one of the privates what he said. The man looked at me, his face pale under the grime. He said the woods are hungry, mon ami, and they do not eat bully beef. I laughed it off then, thinking it was just fatigue and French dramatics. I was wrong. We marched into the trench as the sun set, the mud sucking at our boots like a starving thing. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, wet earth, and something else, something musky and foul like a zoo cage that hadn't been cleaned in a month. It was the smell of Sector Zero. The first night was the worst because of what didn't happen. There was no shelling, no machine gun fire from the German lines, no flares lighting up the desolate wasteland of no man's land. It was dead quiet, a silence that pressed against your eardrums until you wanted to scream just to break it. The forest beyond the wire was a wall of blackness. You couldn't see 5 feet past the parapet. Lieutenant Miller, our platoon commander, was a nervous man, always polishing his brass buttons, even here in the filth. He kept checking his watch, pacing the duckboards, his boots making a rhythmic thud-thud-thud that grated on everyone's nerves. "Keep your eyes peeled, lads," he'd whisper every time he passed, his voice tight. "Jerry's up to something. I can feel it." We all felt it. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for us to make a mistake. I spent my watch staring into the darkness until my eyes watered, seeing movement in every shadow. A branch waving in the wind became a crawling soldier. A stump became a crouching sniper. The mind plays tricks when it's deprived of sensory input, filling the void with its own fears. But the things I was imagining were nothing compared to what was actually out there. The disappearances started on the 3rd night. Private Silas was on the far left sentry post, a lonely spot where the trench hooked around a massive oak tree that had somehow survived the shelling. Silas was a quiet man from a farm in Yorkshire. He liked to whittle little animals out of wood scraps during the day. When the relief sentry went to take over at 0200 hours, Silas was gone. His rifle was leaning against the fire step. His helmet was on the ground, and his pack was untouched. But of Silas, there was no sign. No blood, no struggle, just an empty post. Lieutenant Miller was convinced it was a German trench raid. They snuck in, grabbed him, and snuck out. They want prisoners for intel. Double the sentries. Stay sharp. We doubled the sentries, standing shoulder to shoulder in the freezing mud, peering into the dark. I didn't believe it was the Germans. A trench raid is a noisy, violent affair. There are grenades, shouting, gunfire. Silas had vanished without a sound. It was as if the earth had just opened up and swallowed him whole. I found one of his little wooden carvings half buried in the mud near his post. It was a sheep, its head missing. The next morning, a heavy fog rolled in, thick as cotton wool, clinging to the ground and muffling all sound. Corporal Joseph, a gruff older soldier who had served in India, took a small patrol out into no man's land to check the wire and look for any sign of Silas. I was on the fire step watching them disappear into the white mist. They weren't gone long. They came running back barely 20 minutes later, their faces pale, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Joseph scrambled over the parapet, slipping in the mud, his eyes wide. "Not German, sir," he gasped to Lieutenant Miller, wiping mud and sweat from his forehead. "Not Germans." He led the lieutenant and a few of us back to a spot just beyond our wire, where the fog was slightly thinner. And the ground there was a churned mess of mud and torn roots. And in the center of it all were tracks. They were massive, deeply indented into the clay. They looked like a wolf's paw prints, but they were impossibly large, easily the size of a dinner plate. The claws had dug deep, tearing up the earth. There was no way a normal animal had made them, and there were no boot prints nearby, no sign of a struggle, just those enormous, impossible tracks leading straight from our wire and into the dense, fog-shrouded forest. That night, the fear in the trench was palpable. It was a cold, hard knot in every man's stomach. We weren't facing an enemy we could see and shoot. We were facing something else, something that left tracks that defied logic. Lieutenant Miller tried to keep morale up, talking about German trickery and psychological warfare, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew, just as we all did, that no German engineer could fake those prints. As darkness fell, a light rain began to fall, turning the trench into a swamp. We stood at our posts, water dripping from our helmets, rifles clutched tight, waiting. Then, around midnight, it started. It began low, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through the ground, felt more than heard. Then it rose, swelling into a terrifying howl that tore through the night sky. It wasn't a mournful cry of a timber wolf. This was a roar of pure, primal rage and hunger, a sound that awakened ancestral fears buried deep in our DNA. It echoed off the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. It sounded like it was coming from everywhere at once, from the forest, from no man's land, even from the sky above us. Every man in the trench froze, breath held, hearts pounding against ribs like trapped birds. The howling continued for hours, a relentless assault on our nerves. It would stop for a few minutes, just long enough for you to start to relax, and then it would start again, louder and closer than before. No one slept. We stood at the parapet, staring into the rain-streaked darkness, praying for dawn. When the sun finally rose, gray and cheerless, we did a roll call. Private Jenkins was missing. He had been on the machine gun post in the center of the line. His partner, a young kid named Billy, was sitting on the fire step, rocking back and forth. His eyes wide and unseeing, he couldn't speak, couldn't explain what had happened. He just kept pointing toward the forest, his hand shaking uncontrollably. We found Jenkins' helmet near the gun, dented and covered in blood. There was a trail of blood leading over the parapet and through a gap in the wire. We followed it for 100 yards into no man's land before it disappeared into a patch of thick, thorny brambles. We didn't go any further. We didn't need to. We knew what we would find, or rather, what we wouldn't find. Jenkins was gone, taken by the thing in the woods. The thing that howled like a damned soul and left tracks the size of a man's chest.
But against this thing, we felt like cavemen huddled around a dying fire, waiting for the saber-toothed tiger to strike. The fear was corrosive, eating away at our discipline, our sanity, our very humanity. We were reverting to something primal, something governed only by the instinct to survive. It was on the 5th night that we finally saw it. The rain had stopped, and a full moon was struggling to break through the clouds, casting a pale, watery light over no man's land. I was on sentry duty with Corporal Joseph. We were both staring at the tree line, our eyes burning from lack of sleep. Suddenly, Joseph grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "There," he whispered, pointing, "by the burnt stump." I looked, straining my eyes against the shifting shadows. At first, I saw nothing. Then, movement. A shape detached itself from the darkness of the trees and stepped into a patch of moonlight. It was huge. It stood on 2 legs, like a man, but it was hunched over, its shoulders massive and powerful. It was covered in thick, dark fur that looked matted and coarse. Its head was wolf-like, with a long snout and pointed ears, but its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow luminescence. It threw its head back and let out a roar that shook the ground, a sound that was half howl, half scream. Then it dropped to all fours and charged. It moved with incredible speed, a blur of muscle and fur, covering the ground in massive loping bounds. It hit our wire at full speed, tearing through the barbs as if they were spider webs. We sprang to our feet, gasping for air, the screams of the wounded ringing in our ears. Lieutenant Miller was the first to speak. His face was gray, his helmet gone. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Fall back to the reserve line! Move! Move!" There was no need to tell us twice. We grabbed what gear we could and ran, stumbling through the communication trenches, slipping in the slime, driven by a blind panic. We didn't stop until we reached the bunkers of the reserve line, half a mile to the rear. We huddled inside, shivering, listening to the sounds of the creature rampaging through the trenches we had just abandoned. We were safe for now, but we knew it wouldn't last. The beast had tasted blood, and it would come for the rest of us. The reserve line was a series of deep, concrete bunkers built by the French earlier in the war. They were damp, rat-infested, and smelled of mold, but they had thick walls and heavy steel doors. We crowded into the largest one, slamming the door shut and barring it with a heavy timber beam. We were safe from immediate attack, but we were trapped. We had no food, very little water, and limited ammunition. And outside, the creature was prowling, its howls echoing through the abandoned trenches, getting closer with every passing hour. Lieutenant Miller was in a state of shock, sitting in a corner, muttering to himself. Corporal Joseph took command. He was a practical man, not given to panic. "All right, listen up," he said, his voice calm and steady in the echoing bunker. "We can't stay here forever. We'll starve or that thing will find a way in. We need a plan." He laid out a map on a ration crate, lit by a flickering candle. "The nearest supply depot is here," he said, pointing to a spot about 2 miles to the west, through the forest. "They'll have ammo, grenades, maybe even a field telephone we can use to call for reinforcements. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we have." He looked around at our terrified faces. "Who's with me?" Silence filled the bunker. To go back out there, into the forest, at night, with that thing hunting us, seemed like suicide. But staying here was a slow death. I looked at Joseph. His face was grim, set in hard lines. He wasn't asking us to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. "I'll go, Corporal," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. I was terrified, but the thought of sitting here, waiting to die, was worse. 2 other men stepped forward, Private Davies, a wiry little man from London who was quick with a knife, and Private O'Connell, a big Irishman with a calming presence. "Right," Joseph said, nodding. 4 of us. We travel light. Rifles, bayonets, and as many grenades as we can carry. We leave at 0300 hours. Get some rest if you can." Nobody rested. We spent the time cleaning our rifles, checking our gear, and trying not to think about what was waiting for us outside the steel door. I wrote a letter to my mother just in case. I folded it up and put it in my tunic pocket next to my heart. At 0300, Joseph unbarred the door. He listened for a moment, then pushed it open just enough for us to slip out, one by one, into the cold, dark night. The forest was a nightmare landscape. The trees were blasted and splintered by shell fire, their branches reaching up like skeletal fingers against the moonlit sky. The ground was a churned mess of mud, shell craters, and tangled barbed wire. We moved in a single file, Joseph in the lead, then me, Davies and O'Connell bringing up the rear. We kept to the shadows, moving slowly and silently, pausing every few yards to listen. The only sounds were the winds sighing through the broken branches and the distant rumble of artillery on a different part of the front. The howling had stopped, which was almost worse. It meant the creature was hunting, stalking its prey in silence. Every shadow seemed to move. Every snapped twig sounded like a footstep. The air was cold and damp, seeping into our bones. My hands were numb on my rifle. I kept my eyes fixed on Joseph's back, trying to match his silent, careful steps. We had covered about half a mile when Joseph suddenly stopped, raising a hand in a silent signal to halt. He crouched down, pointing to the ground ahead. In a patch of soft mud, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight, was a fresh track. It was the same massive clawed print we had seen before, and it was pointing directly towards us. "It knows we're here," Joseph whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's tracking us." Before we could react, a dark shape exploded from the underbrush to our left. It was the creature. It had circled around and ambushed us. It slammed into O'Connell, the last man in the line, knocking him off his feet before he could even raise his rifle. He screamed as the beast tore into him. Joseph, Davies, and I spun around, bringing our rifles up. "Fire!" Joseph yelled. We opened up, pouring fire into the creature at point-blank range. The bullets hit with wet thud, thud, thud of lead striking flesh, but the thing didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. It leapt over the parapet, landing right on top of the machine gun post. Billy screamed as the creature swiped at him with a massive clawed hand, sending him flying against the trench wall. Then it grabbed the machine gun, tearing it from its mount with terrifying ease and tossing it aside like a toy. It stood up, roaring again, its yellow eyes scanning the trench, looking for its next victim. It was even bigger up close, towering over us, a nightmare of teeth and claws and muscle. The smell was overwhelming, a wave of rotting meat and musk that made me gag. Men were scrambling backwards, slipping in the mud, dropping their rifles in panic. The discipline Lieutenant Miller tried so hard to maintain evaporated in an instant. We were no longer a military unit. We were a terrified mob.
I saw the creature grab Private Higgins, a big man who had been a blacksmith before the war. It lifted him off his feet with one hand, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. Higgins screamed, a sound of pure terror that was cut short as the creature bit down on his shoulder. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Then, with a powerful leap, the thing cleared the back of the trench, carrying Higgins with it, and disappeared into the darkness of the support lines behind us. The whole attack had lasted less than a minute. We were left standing in the mud, stunned, gasping. I was alone. The creature turned its glowing yellow eyes on me. It snarled, blood dripping from its jaws. I didn't think. I just turned and ran. I ran blindly through the forest, stumbling over roots, tearing my uniform on thorns, splashing through mud-filled shell craters. I could hear the creature behind me, its heavy footfalls pounding on the ground, its breath coming in ragged gasps. It was gaining on me. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I had to find a place to hide, a place to fight. I saw the ruins of an old stone farmhouse ahead, illuminated by a sudden flare that burst overhead. It was little more than a few crumbling walls and a broken chimney, but it was better than being out in the open. I sprinted toward it, bursting through what was left of the doorway and scrambling over a pile of rubble into the cellar. I landed in a heap on the damp floor, gasping for air. Above me, I heard the creature crash into the walls, roaring in frustration. It began to tear at the stones, trying to widen the opening to get to me. Dust and debris rained down on my head. I huddled in a corner, clutching my empty rifle, praying that the walls would hold. The cellar was small and dark, smelling of damp earth and old potatoes. The only light came from the gap in the floor above, where the creature was tearing at the entrance. I could see its massive claws hooking around the stones, pulling them away as if they were made of cardboard. It was only a matter of time before it got in. I looked around desperately for a weapon, anything I could use. My rifle was empty, and I had lost my bayonet in the fall. In the far corner, half buried in rubble, I saw a wooden crate with German markings. I crawled over to it and pried the lid open. Inside were grenades, German stick grenades, the potato mashers. There were 6 of them. A glimmer of hope ignited in my chest. I grabbed 2 of them, checking the pull cords. They were old, and the wood handles were damp. I didn't know if they would still work. Above me, a large section of the floor gave way with a crash. The creature's head appeared in the opening, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness of the cellar, its jaws snapping. It saw me. It let out a triumphant roar and began to squeeze its massive shoulders through the hole. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the cord on the first grenade. I heard the fuse hiss. I counted to 3, then threw it up through the hole, straight into the creature's face. It roared in surprise, trying to bat the grenade away, but it was too late. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Dust and smoke filled the cellar. I was thrown backwards against the wall, my ears ringing. When the smoke cleared, I saw that the creature had been blown back out of the hole. I could hear it outside, thrashing around and howling in pain. I knew I hadn't killed it, just wounded it. I grabbed the second grenade, pulled the cord, and threw it after the first one. Another explosion shook the farmhouse ruins. The howling stopped. There was silence, save for the sound of falling debris. I waited, my heart pounding, clutching a third grenade, ready to throw it if the creature reappeared. Minutes passed. Nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I climbed up the rubble pile and peered out of the hole. The creature was gone. There was a large crater where it had been standing, and a trail of thick, dark blood leading away into the forest. I had done it. I had driven it off. I didn't stay to celebrate. I knew the creature might come back, or there might be others. I grabbed the remaining grenades and scrambled out of the cellar. I ran back toward the supply depot, following the compass Joseph had given me before we left the bunker. I reached the depot just as dawn was breaking. It was a scene of devastation. The bunkers had been smashed open, supplies were scattered everywhere, and the bodies of the soldiers who had been guarding it were strewn about, torn to pieces in the same brutal manner as my comrades. The creature had been here, too. I searched through the wreckage until I found what I needed: crates of ammunition and a working field telephone. I hooked the phone up to the intact communication line and cranked the handle. "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there?" I shouted into the mouthpiece. For a moment, a crackly voice answered. "This is HQ. Who is this? Identify yourself." "This is Private Finch, 5th Battalion. We're wiped out. Everyone's gone. I'm at Supply Depot Delta. Send help. Send everyone you have. There's something out here. Something not human." It took 2 hours for the reinforcements to arrive. A company of fresh troops from the reserve, led by a stern-faced major. They found me sitting on a crate of ammunition, rifle across my knees, surrounded by the carnage at the depot. The major looked at the bodies, at the smashed bunkers, at the massive claw marks on the doors. He didn't say a word. He just ordered his men to set up a defensive perimeter and to start collecting the dead. He asked me for a report. I told him everything: the disappearances, the tracks, the howling, the attack on the trench, the creature itself. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When he finished, he looked at me for a long moment. "You've been through a lot, Private. Get yourself some food and water. We'll take it from here." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was suffering from shell shock, that I had hallucinated the whole thing. The official report would say that the 5th Battalion had been wiped out by a massive German artillery barrage and subsequent infantry assault. The claw marks, the tracks, the strange wounds on the bodies, all of it would be explained away or ignored. I was sent back to a field hospital behind the lines. They treated my cuts and bruises, gave me a sedative, and let me sleep for 24 hours. When I woke up, I was told that I was being transferred to a different unit, far away from the Argonne sector. I was never interrogated about what happened. No one asked for details. The whole incident was being hushed up. The war machine couldn't afford to have stories of monsters in the woods spreading among the troops. Morale was already low enough. I tried to tell the doctor at the hospital about the creature, but he just smiled patronizingly and gave me more pills. "It's the stress of combat, son. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Try to forget about it." But I couldn't forget. I saw the creature's glowing yellow eyes every time I closed my own. I heard its howl in every wind. I knew the truth. The war wasn't just against the Germans. There were other things out there in the dark places of the world, things that had been awakened by the bloodshed and chaos, and they were hungry. 2 nights before I was scheduled to ship out, the hospital camp was attacked. It was miles behind the front line, supposed to be a safe zone. I was woken by the sound of screaming and gunfire. I grabbed my rifle and ran out of the tent. The camp was in chaos. Tents were on fire, men were running in panic, and in the center of it all, illuminated by the flames, was the creature. It had followed me. It had tracked me down.
It was even bigger than I remembered, its fur matted with fresh blood, its yellow eyes glowing with a furious intensity. It was tearing through the camp, tossing guards aside, smashing through tents. It seemed to be looking for something, or someone. Its eyes scanned the crowd of terrified soldiers until they landed on me. It let out a roar that drowned out the sounds of the battle, and charged. I didn't hesitate this time. I was tired of running. I stood my ground, raised my rifle, and fired.
The bullet hit the creature in the chest, but it didn't stop. It just seemed to make it angrier. It was on me in seconds, its massive hand swiped out, knocking the rifle from my grasp. I fell to the ground, stunned. The creature loomed over me, its jaws snapping, its foul breath washing over my face. This was it. This was the end. I closed my eyes and waited for the final blow. But it didn't come. I heard a shout and then a loud bang. I opened my eyes. The creature was staggering back, roaring in pain. A man was standing over me, holding a smoking shotgun. It was the doctor who had treated me. He had grabbed a weapon from a fallen guard and fired at the creature at point-blank range. "Get up, Finch," he yelled, pulling me to my feet. "Run!" We ran toward the edge of the camp, the creature in hot pursuit. It was wounded, but it was still fast. We reached the tree line just as a group of armed guards arrived from the main base. They opened fire with rifles and a machine gun. The creature, faced with this wall of lead, finally turned and fled back into the darkness of the forest. The attack on the hospital was blamed on German saboteurs. The doctor and I were the only ones who knew the truth. We were both transferred again, sent to different units on different parts of the front. I never saw him again. I survived the war. I went back home to England, got married, found a job. I tried to live a normal life. But I was never the same. The shadow of the creature hung over me. I could never walk in the woods again without looking over my shoulder. I could never hear a dog howl without feeling a cold chill down my spine. I knew that the creature was still out there, somewhere. The war had ended, but the beast had not been defeated. It had retreated back into the shadows, waiting for the next time the world went mad, the next time the blood flowed freely enough to wake it from its slumber. I was an old man now, but the memories were as fresh as if they had happened yesterday. The smell of the trenches, the mud, the fear, and those glowing yellow eyes in the darkness. I have written this account down, not because I expect anyone to believe it, but because I need to get it out of my head before I die. I need to put it on paper, to give it a form that I can lock away in a drawer and try to forget. I know my time is short. I can feel the darkness closing in. But I am not afraid of death. I have looked death in the face, in the form of a monster in the woods of France, and I survived. What I fear is that the world will forget, that we'll become complacent again, thinking that our civilization, our technology, our reason can protect us from the primal forces that lurk in the dark. The beast of Sector Zero was not a unique aberration. It was a symptom of a sickness that lies deep within the human soul, a sickness that drives us to war and destruction. And as long as that sickness exists, the beasts will always be there, waiting in the shadows, ready to feed on our fear and our blood. So this is my warning to you, whoever reads this. Do not be fooled by the illusion of safety. The world is a much stranger and more dangerous place than you can imagine. There are things out there that defy explanation, things that hunt us for sport. Stay vigilant. Watch the shadows. And if you ever find yourself in a dark forest at night and you hear a howl that makes your blood run cold, do not stop to investigate. Do not try to be a hero. Just run. Run as fast as you can and don't look back. Because if you do, you might see the glowing yellow eyes of the beast, and that will be the last thing you ever see. The war may be over, but the hunt continues. The beast is still out there, and it is always hungry.